to start the recording. So welcome to Social Planning Toronto's 2025 City Budget Town Hall. Thank you for joining us today. Every year we host these town halls to break down the city's multi-billion-dollar budget and discuss priorities that will help us build a better, more equitable city. These town halls are part of SPT's broader budget work to engage leaders, advocates, and community-based organizations to get involved in the city budget process, provide analysis and research, and collectively take action to advance investments that will respond to the urgent needs of our communities and deliver the programs and services that we all rely on a daily basis. By working together over the years, we've ensured millions of dollars in investments in transit, housing, services for the unhoused, childcare, recreation, community programs, and more. With elections on the horizon this year at both the provincial and federal levels, we don't know what lies ahead. What we do know is that programs and services for some of our most vulnerable residents will be cut this year. Safe consumption site locations will be closing and harm reduction services will be eliminated across Ontario, while funding cuts to settlement services will be happening this year and next. All of this is happening as we see a growth in the number of overdoses, skyrocketing homelessness and hunger, and community organizations who are working to support newcomers and asylum seekers as they try to settle into a new country. We know our communities will be relying on city services as all of this unfolds, and that we must speak up. We hope that today's events and all of our city budget work provide you with the resources you need to have your voice heard in this year's city budget process. Over the past 2 years, the mayor and budget chief have opened up additional opportunities for residents to share their input in the city budget process. In the fall, public consultations were held, including an online survey, community conversations, and public meetings. This month, there are telephone town halls being held, as well as opportunities to speak to the budget committee. Local city councilors are also hosting their own budget town halls. You can see some of this on our next slide. These are important opportunities for you to participate. We know that the mayor and budget chief are listening. Last year, through your participation, we saw increased investments in tenant supports, community services, transit, and more. But we also saw the police budget increase, despite it being the top budget line that residents said they wanted to see reduced. This year is no different. The police budget is projected to have a significant increase in spite of previous city council directives to consider reducing police spending. So I encourage you to check out Social Planning Toronto's city budget resource page to access the analysis, ways to get involved, events, and more. We hope that with what you hear today and through our budget resources and workshops, you'll feel confident to sign up for a deputation or submit a letter to the budget committee or participate in many other ways in this year's budget process. Today, we have an incredible group of expert speakers who are going to share their analysis on important issues in this year's budget and update us on the good, the bad, and the ugly, and key messages that City Council needs to hear. After the presentation, we'll have some time for you to ask questions and share your thoughts, and we encourage you to share your questions in the chat. Someone from SPT will collect them for our speakers, and we'll try to get as many answered as we can after the presentations. Next, first up, I'm going to invite our senior researcher and policy analyst, Beth Wilson, to present her analysis of the 2025 city budget. You all know our senior researcher, Beth Wilson. Her research and analysis support resident engagement and advocacy to create a more equitable, just, and sustainable city for all. Beth is a key contributor of SPT's City Budget Watch. We rely on her every year for her incredible analysis. She's been doing this for over 15 years. Thank you, Beth, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks everyone for coming today. How's my volume? Is it okay?
There it is.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you.
Oh, no.
So I am going to talk a bit about the city budget in general and the process, and then go into some highlights from the 2025 city budget. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Mercedes. So budget decisions, these are annual decisions that the mayor and council make. And they are some of the most important decisions that council will make all year. They decide what will be funded, if there will be cuts, how funds will be raised, and how that's going to impact programs, services, and infrastructure in the city. We know city services are extremely important to residents, important to our communities, and to what kind of city we want to live in. And we can think of a long list, but this is just a few of the city's role in affordable housing, shelter and support, public transit, community services, recreation, and a variety of programs to advance strategies around equity and around Indigenous community and truth and reconciliation, to name a few. So this is really the moment where the mayor and council will set priorities for the city, and we think the role of community is extremely important in this work. So a few words on the budget. So Toronto has a large budget. It's larger than a lot of the budgets of other provinces in Canada. This year's operating budget is 18.8 billion, and the 10-year capital plan is almost 60 billion. The operating budget covers the day-to-day expenses of providing services. So you can think of, for example, recreation programs or parks maintenance, public health services, transit, police, and other emergency services. Just a short list, but that's part of operating. And the capital budget and the 10-year capital plan is all about the city's assets, its infrastructure, which are essential to support services. So some examples are around construction and repair of transit infrastructure, the purchase of subway cars and streetcars and buses, roads, bridges, bike lanes, public buildings and park facilities, all part of capital and all essential to the operation and the delivery of services. The city has three rate-supported budgets: Toronto Water, solid waste management, so that's your garbage, blue bin, compost pickup, and Toronto Parking Authority, so those green P parking lots across the city. So those are rate-supported budgets, and they are funded almost entirely by user fees that, you know, when the water bill comes in, that you or the landlord pay. Same with the garbage bin fee and also parking in those green P parking lots. So they come from rates or user fees, and the rest are all tax supported budgets. And so looking at the 2025 operating budget, the whole for the whole city, all the programs, divisions, everything, where does the money come from? So I'm just going to touch on a few of these. 30% of revenues for operating budget come from property taxes. That's residential and non-residential property taxes. And that's this year, it would be 5.6 billion of that 18.8 billion coming from property taxes. The federal and provincial governments and funding and transfers from those senior orders of government are extremely important. It's 25%. And we always want to see that bar extend and see more and fairer funding from those senior orders of government. So that's really important. Those rate programs, those fees that are paid, that's about 12% of the overall revenue. They go specifically to those programs, those rate-based programs. And I'll also point out transit fares are 6% of the overall revenue for the operating budget, but they contribute specifically to the TTC budget, and it is Fares are contributing 38% of the TTC's operating budget. The last one I wanted to mention is municipal land transfer tax. If someone purchases a home, they pay that tax. It's extremely important for the revenue of the city, and it makes up about 5% of operating budget. And then specifically residential property taxes. So where does that money go? That part of that 30%, but this piece is the residential. And for a person with an average home, average assessed value for the city of Toronto, the property tax bill for the year, if this budget, is finalized, will be $4,160. And then we look at where do those dollars go in terms of specific programs and services. So transit, it's about 19.3% of residential property taxes go to transit, 17% to police, 12.3% to capital investments and corporate financing. I know at least part of that has to do with borrowing costs for debt. So they'll take on debt for certain capital projects, and that's sort of the interest they would pay. That's capital financing. 11.1% goes to cost-shared social programs. So there are a number of those with the province. So some of them are in public health, for example. And 9.4% for fire and paramedics. And then the rest are grouped together and smaller amounts. And so that's where those residential property taxes go. I want to go through the city's budget process. So this is their schedule. So Melissa was mentioning some of these moments in the schedule. So they had the pre-budget public consultations in the fall. On Monday, just this past Monday, January 13th, the staff prepared budget was launched. And so this is not the final budget. It's prepared with direction from council, and it is prepared by senior staff, so finance staff, division staff, and it was launched on Monday. The budget committee, which is made up of councillors, they review every part of the budget is a very jam-packed schedule over 3 days. So January 15th, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they'll complete their review of the budget. They hear presentations from city staff, and they can ask questions of staff. And they can also request briefing notes, which provide more detail about the budget. So that's happening right now. Telephone town halls, Melissa was mentioning, one was last night, and there'll be another one on January 23rd, and really to connect with residents, can connect with the mayor and the budget chair and learn more about the budget and provide some input on the budget there. The deputations, or the public hearings or presentations, really important opportunity to participate. You usually get about 5 minutes, and you can speak to members of the budget committee online, in person, a couple of different locations across the city. Those are on January 21st and 22nd. Then the budget committee meets for a final meeting for this budget cycle, and that's on January 24th. And they will put forward any recommendations they would like. They'll put forward motions and they'll vote on them, and those recommendations go to the mayor. And they will say, we would want you to prioritize this. We want you to change the staff prepared budget in this way. And they will make these recommendations based on a majority vote. And then the mayor's budget will be released by February 1st. It might not be on February 1st. That's a Saturday. So it might be a little bit earlier. Maybe it'll be the day before on the Friday. So we'll see when it comes out, but it has to be by February 1st. And what's happened in the past is the mayor would take the staff prepared budget and then make changes. So last year, Mayor Chow added a number of improvements to public and community services in the mayor's budget. So That's really an opportunity to advocate for change in that lead up to the mayor's budget as well, and participate in various ways. The mayor's budget goes to city council on February 11th. So the whole council meets and they can vote to amend the mayor's budget. So they can vote on certain changes and it will be debated, and that will be final decisions on the budget February 11th. So I will go through a couple of highlights from the city budget. There are a number of presenters after me, so I will not go into a great deal of detail. I know folks will be doing that, which is great. So after those public consultations, these slides, a number of the images are from the City of Toronto's budget presentation, which we'll share with you. And so after the budget consultations, the public consultations that they had in the fall, the city staff identified these 4 key areas. And these are priorities that came out of public consultation. So making life affordable, getting Toronto moving, providing community services, and keeping people safe. And the slide, I won't go through it because I'm going to speak to some of these items, and I know other people will as well. But to say that this budget includes $94 million for new and enhanced programs and services. So improvements to or introduction of new services. And of that 94 million, 59.2 million comes from property tax revenues. So a significant contribution from the city. I would say it's less than last year, but it is significant compared to many other years. And that you will not be surprised that it is, we are just facing so many huge challenges in the city that we know that's not sufficient, and we want to see improvements in this budget. So one of the things we're always interested in is where are the investments to expand services or introduce new services related to poverty reduction. So the city has a poverty reduction strategy. They made a commitment in 2015. It's a 20-year strategy. We're about halfway there. I feel like we're not too close when I look around and see the kind of struggle people are experiencing in our communities in terms of a poverty reduction strategy. So I wanted to say a few words. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but just to say there's 2 slides that will show you with the list of what the city has identified as new and enhanced programs and services that move the poverty reduction strategy forward. And it amounts to $36.5 million, of which about 30 comes from property taxes. We had some conversation where we said, is that really poverty reduction? Is that something else? So there can be some debate about what is on the list. I'll just give you the briefest of summaries. So it includes youth violence prevention, a cooling pilot program for low-income and vulnerable individuals and high-rises, so related to providing air conditioning. There are a number of items on tenant housing and shelter-related enhancements that I know folks will speak to. In Parks and Rec, expansion of hours for outdoor pools, wading pools, camp nutrition program, and funding related to the encampment office and parks. There's early local registration pilot program at select free recreation centers, and really to address the issue that sometimes local communities are not being able to access recreation in their local recreation center. So there's some work going on there. And if you want to go to the next page, I'll just summarize a little bit what's here. In social development, finance and administration, there's also work around youth violence prevention, the Downtown East Action Plan, Indigenous Youth Fellowship Program. So these are all new and enhanced programs. There's student nutrition program expansion, library hours, another library related services expansion. So a number, so I'll maybe stop there, but I know we're going to go into more detail. So a number of positive enhancements. And I would say, how does this list and other investments that the city is making, how does it do in terms of meeting those goals around improvements to the city, and where does it fall short, and where do we have concerns? I'm really interested in that conversation. I will say one observation is that the total for new and enhanced services for poverty reduction is about 36.5 million. And as you'll see on the next screen, that's quite a bit less than, and across all these different areas. And that is quite a bit less than if we just look at the planned increase for the police budget. So, so point of some discussion, I'm sure. And we can see our communities are really struggling with poverty, with affordability and homelessness. And so this feels like there is an awful lot of room for improvement on the poverty reduction front, for sure. And I know people will speak to this in more detail. So I want to share with you a few select highlights. So the police budget, the number I'll point you to is 46.2 million from property taxes. That's the increase from property taxes to the police budget. But we know that is not the true increase to the police budget because negotiations are still underway between Toronto Police and the police union. So there's going to be a new collective agreement this year. And when that happens, that increase to the police budget is going to be much higher than that 46.2 million. Also, if you look at revenue from all property taxes, residential, non-residential, 21.6% goes to the police. So it is quite a considerable amount, and that means those resources are not available elsewhere. For folks who are accessing community services provided by nonprofits or who work at nonprofits, there is a built-in inflationary increase for the Community Partnership and Investment Program, CPIP, which is just over $1 million, and it's a 3.5% increase. The question we have right now is sometimes CPIP gets an inflationary increase, but similar services provided by the city get an inflationary increase that's actually a bit bigger. So we want to see if this increase is comparable to what city services are receiving that do similar work. So we will let you know through City Budget Watch what we find out. There's also 3.5% recreation user fee increase, and that's for registered programs, and it's where fees are charged. So not at the centers where programs are free, but where they're charged. So a couple of additional highlights. Quick word on, this is the state of good repair backlog. And so it reflects the unfunded costs associated with keeping city assets in a state of good repair. So you want that line to not go up, and you also want it to be closer to zero than it is. But it is a bit of a good news story that because of the new deal with the provincial government, and particularly the uploading of the gardener and the DVP, the maintenance expenses, it's really cleared the city to apply that funding to other things. So there are still, that line is still going up considerably, but it's flatter than it was before. It is an improvement, but even yesterday we were hearing from Toronto Community Housing about homes in a poor state of repair and not having the resources. So a lot of work to do, but that gardener DVP upload was certainly helpful in this regard. And lastly, I want to have a word on property taxes, because sometimes we see, these percentages and what do they actually mean. So this year, I'm going to give you the long story short, because I don't want to go too long. So the residential property tax increase is 6.9%. That's what's proposed, not final until the final vote. What that's made up of is a residential property tax increase of 5.4% and 1.5% increase to the city building fund. And that pays for transit and housing infrastructure at the city building fund. So there's sort of two parts to it. The overall impact for someone who owns a home at an average assessed value in the city would be an additional $268.37 for the year. And that is $22.36 per month would be the increase. So just putting some numbers to it. If the house is worth less, then the increase is less. If the house is worth more, then the increase is more. Don't go so much by the assessed value dollar figure there. There's a longer story about what that is, but it's based on 2016 assessments. If the house is above average in terms of assessed value, then that increase would be more. There are also property tax relief programs for low-income seniors and people with disabilities who own their own homes, where there is a way to cancel or defer the property tax increase or other fee increases. So there is a program to kind of mitigate the impact for these groups if they are going to have a difficult time paying that bill. So overall, I'll just close with the proposed increase is going to generate, if it goes through, it'll generate 251 million in revenue from all property taxes, and also an additional 69 million for the city building fund. And I would just say, we really need the funding. We really need the funding. And Toronto continues to have one of the lowest property tax rates. The funds are very much needed. And when we have seen very low property tax increases, we've also seen a real decline in the city. So those two things go together. In addition, we need to see better, fairer funding from the province and the federal government, and new revenue tools as well. And I know there's going to be some conversation around the commercial parking levy, so we can, think about that one too. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth, for breaking that all down for us. It's an interesting budget year for sure. So appreciate all of the analysis that you've done and explaining, going into detail of helping us understand the budget. So if you have any questions for Beth, I encourage you to share them in the chat. I can see all the comments and participation in the chat. It's great to see. Next, I'd like to invite up Sara Beyer from the Right to Housing Toronto Coalition to share their analysis on housing and tenant issues. Sara is currently the Manager of Policy with the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, where she works to advance human rights-based housing at all levels of government. She's also a member of the Right to Housing Toronto network, which supports the implementation of the right to housing by the City of Toronto and is coordinated by the CCHR. Sara is a policy professional with experience in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors, where she's focused her practice on housing affordability and Indigenous settler relations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sara.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the introduction. So maybe just to move quickly through to the next slide, as Melissa said, I'll be speaking to some of the housing and renter related impacts in the budget. And Melissa's already kind of introduced Right to Housing Toronto, and I'm here kind of on behalf of that network. Please feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about the work that we do. Next slide, please. So I'll just spend a bit of time going over in kind of a higher level, some of the new and enhanced housing related funding that's being proposed in the budget, then get into a little bit of further detail analysis on a few key areas, and wrap up with a couple of initial recommendations that we've started to think about based on what's in this budget. And I believe this will be shared with everyone after the event. Next slide, please. So I won't spend too much time on this because I think Beth already did such a fantastic job covering the overall budget, but just a couple of things I wanted to point out. One is that the new and enhanced funding proposed in the 2025 budget is, significantly less than what we saw in last year's budget, and actually less than the overall total of new funding put towards just housing and shelter in last year's budget. I think the caveat is that it was a new administration coming in last year, and they were kind of making up for many years of underinvestment in these critical programs. So understandable that last year would have seen maybe greater investment than we're seeing this year, but just thought it was a pretty stark contrast to point out here. I maybe just for the sake of time won't get into too much of the other pieces because Beth already touched on them, but I'll take some time now to go through some of the high-level investments in a few of the key departments that are related to housing at the city. So that would be the Housing Secretariat, Toronto Building, and Municipal Licensing and Standards. Next slide, please. So we saw a modest kind of investment in new and enhanced funding in the Housing Secretariat at 3.6 million. There is a caveat here, which is that they have shifted two programs that were previously in the Housing Secretariat operating budget into the capital budget, and that is the multi-unit residential acquisition fund, as well as the multi-tenant housing renovation program. So I'll speak about both of those in a little bit, but just to say those would not be represented in this part of the Housing Secretariat's budget. What we do see are a couple of new investments for tenant supports. So one is $1 million going towards, and again, this is new funding, going towards the rent bank, and that is estimated to support about 300 additional households from avoiding eviction. Then we also have the eviction prevention in the community program. The budget is proposing $800,000 for a new interim rent relief pilot. This is estimated to reach about up to 170 additional households with this interim benefit for about 6 months. And the pilot would target households who are transitioning from a lower to a higher income. So for example, moving from Ontario Works to ODSP would be one example of that. To be a little bit more expedient and efficient in how that funding could support that household and would be for kind of a limited period of time until they transfer to that higher income. The Toronto Tenant Support Program is proposed to receive $350,000, which would add a new position, as well as additional funding for the 3 agencies that deliver the TTSP program, and that would enhance tenant outreach, education, and engagement, especially related to the implementation of the renovictions bylaw and the multi-tenant housing framework. There is also additional funding for housing development, renewal, and improvement. This is $299,000, which would go towards 3 new development positions to support the city's activities, which would include oversight of the MURA program and the multi-tenant housing program. And then finally, an increase of $1.172 million for operating subsidies for Toronto Community Housing and Toronto Seniors Housing. Next slide, please. So I thought just for comparison's sake, we could take a quick look at last year's Housing Secretariat operating budget just to kind of see the difference. Again, with the caveat of, last year, a lot of new investments were added because of, those long years where we saw these areas really underinvested. And I have highlighted MURA and the MTH program here because, as I mentioned, those are not going to be included in the 2025 budget, so it didn't feel like a fair comparison to keep them in. But what we do see is a difference of $6 million in new and enhanced funding between 2024 and 2025, as in there was $6 million more new dollars put into the Housing Secretariat last year than this year. And one of the areas that we did see increase last year was around rent geared to income housing, and we didn't see that increase this year. Next slide, please. So beyond the Housing Secretariat, we also have 2 other departments that have housing related investments. So one of the key new programs is for Toronto Building, and they are tasked with overseeing the implementation of the new rental renovation license program, which is connected to the new renovictions bylaw. So they are proposing $1.4 million in 2025 to hire 14 new staff who would administer and enforce the bylaw, as well as funding for a public education and communication strategy related to the bylaw. As for MLS, they have said they will be adding 10 new positions to support the Rent Safe TO program. We are clarifying this number with MLS now because it seems to be a bit inflated. So we'll follow up when we have more information on that. And then just to compare that, we did see last year some additional funding in MLS for both Rent Safe TO as well as licensing for the multi-tenant housing framework. Next slide, please. So just to get a little bit deeper into the details of some of those different programs and services, looking at renter supports first, with the rent bank, we see that there was an increase in 1 million this year, same as last year, but they are targeting to reach 500 more households in 2025 than they did in 2024. So a bit of a discrepancy there in terms of how the same amount of new funding is going to be reaching even more households than it did last year. On EPIC, the eviction prevention in the community program, promising to see this new pilot project come out. But we know that there's such a great depth of need around eviction prevention and support, for all different types of households and lower income households in particular, not just for those who are going to be seeing an increase in their income. So I think would want to see, sustained and increased funding for EPIC above and beyond this new pilot program. And then the Toronto Tenant Support Program, the city says that it currently supports over 10,000 tenants, and the new funding is expected to expand that reach by 50%. Which is promising, but I think, the city is also going to be leaning quite heavily on the TTSP program to support and provide education around a number of new programs, including the multi-tenant housing framework, the new rent evictions bylaw, and that program also supports tenants with many other ongoing issues. So it's, knowing that half of Torontonians are renters, it's probably not going to go as far as it needs to meet the level of need we see across the city. Next slide, please. So next we see around the tracking here from the housing subsidies and benefits available through the city. And sorry, I should have mentioned these charts are coming directly from the Housing Secretariat budget note if folks want to find a little bit more detail in there. Don't want to get too into the weeds here, but we know that the waiting list for social housing is at about 93,000 households right now, and that is only going to keep rising without sustained support, both in the kind of housing subsidy and benefit space, but also in building new deeply affordable housing. So, I think the takeaway here really is there's a role for all levels of government to prioritize and invest more deeply to meet the needs of those who are most impacted by the housing crisis. Next slide, please. So now shifting a little bit away from the operating side to the capital plan for the Housing Secretariat. They have a 10-year capital plan, which Beth had mentioned earlier. In terms of new affordable housing development, over 10 years, they've committed $1 billion towards city-led rental development and $406 million towards city-supported rental and home ownership development. From this chart here, a generally positive outlook in terms of new affordable housing approvals and completions, although in the city's targets, there is a real emphasis on those rent-controlled or affordable homes, as opposed to that deeply affordable rent geared to income housing. And we know that's really what's needed to support those in the greatest need. So, ongoing advocacy to do on that piece. Next slide. The other piece of the capital plan is also around the preservation of affordable housing. And we know this is just such a critical way to, combat the loss of affordable housing that we see in the city, but also to protect, security and stability for tenants. So we see in the 10-year capital plan, $1.9 billion going towards state of good repair for Toronto community housing and Toronto seniors housing, and then just $119 million over 10 years for MIRA, the multi-unit residential acquisition program, the multi-tenant housing program, and other renovation programs and repair programs. And that represents just 3.5% of the entire 10-year capital budget. As far as I can tell, and others may have better insight than me on this at this point, it appears that there isn't any new funding for MIRA or the MTH program for 2025. It's just continued funding from what was committed previously, although I know a note just came out about MIRA today, so there might be a little bit more insight there that we're going to follow up on. We do know also that those three new positions rather that I mentioned earlier around development are going to be overseeing both MIRA and the MTH program, but they're not dedicated exclusively to those programs. I'll just say on MIRA, it's really one of the city's most successful programs, as we can see here, well exceeding its targets, but really not receiving, all of the funding that it should. And it's such a critical program to preserve affordability and protect tenants, as I mentioned. So a key area for advocacy, I think. On multi-tenant housing, again, we don't see, it appears no increased funding this year for the renovation program, but we know that there is really significant need across the city to ensure that multi-tenant homes can comply with the new framework without displacing tenants. It's a real concern that tenants are going to be displaced as operators either try to come into compliance with this new framework or maybe end up selling off their homes because they don't they feel like it's too onerous or they don't have enough support to come into compliance. Other programs that aren't captured under the capital plan, but also related to affordable housing preservation. I spoke already about the renovictions bylaw with the new staff and an education campaign. That's going to be starting on July 1st, which is just 1 month before the bylaw comes into effect. Might not be quite enough time for that new staff to familiarize themselves with the bylaw and the broader housing context, but promising that some of that money is going to go towards public education. And we always want to advocate for staff to really closely monitor and track the impacts of these types of programs to make sure, in particular for the renovictions bylaw, that tenants are adequately supported and able to return to their units. Other relevant kind of programs are the city's rental replacement policy. So similarly, want to make sure that the city is monitoring that really closely, making sure that developers are following the rules and that tenants are well supported. They're actually consulting on that policy presently. Rent Safe TO, I mentioned, they're looking to add 10 new staff. And then the housing at risk table is something that has been kind of on the agenda for a little while, but we still don't have any update on its progress in terms of launching that, which is supposed to kind of help to address affordable housing loss and tenants that are facing challenges in their tenancies. So sorry, next slide is my last slide. Apologies if I've gone a bit over time. This is kind of just a bit of a summary of some of our initial recommendations. So really a strong focus on renter supports and affordable housing preservation, which we feel are going to make the biggest impact on, tackling some of the biggest parts of that housing crisis that we're seeing. I do, before I sign off, just want to say a big thanks to Melissa Goldstein, who's done such a wonderful and in-depth analysis of the budget, much more than I could get to here. And I'm happy to share this and chat with anyone else after that. So maybe I'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much.
Sarah, thank you so much. That was a really, really comprehensive look at where some of the changes are happening and what some of the investments are. Really appreciate it. I'm going to call on Stephen Mensah next. Stephen is the Executive Director for the Toronto Youth Cabinet, and representing over 623,000 young Torontonians. Under his leadership, the Toronto Youth Cabinet has successfully influenced multiple policy changes in our education system that benefited Ontario's 2 million students, such as ensuring free menstrual products in schools, de-streaming grade 9, and the Toronto Youth Cabinet has led initiatives addressing community safety, youth employment, and youth unemployment, securing an additional $15 million for youth programs, as well as establishing 5 new youth hubs in Toronto. Stephen was recognized by Toronto Life as one of the Toronto's rising stars in 2023 and we're excited to have him join us here. Please go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Much appreciated. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So I'm just gonna kind of be giving some high-level points in respects to what type of investments the budget does make, and where they fall short, and what the Toronto cabinet, and most importantly, what young people are hoping to see when Mayor Chow puts forward her budget. And I will be quick. So in respects to the investments she made, 6 million she put towards expanding student nutrition programs year round. She also added an extra 1 million for the provision of food at 45 day camps during the summer. So 45 day camp locations in the summer will be able to provide breakfast for young people with a $1 million investment. In the budget, we also saw and a 443,000 investment to add youth hubs. I actually met with TPL yesterday on that piece, and I believe it's 3 or 2 youth hubs in addition now with the 443K, which is beneficial because it takes us now to 31 parts of Toronto, mostly neighborhood improvement areas and priority neighborhoods, now have access to a youth hub. And I saw that in the line item for the city manager budget, there's an additional 5 million towards youth violence prevention program. As of yet, waiting to know what that means and if they like really figured out where that's gonna go. But nonetheless, that's where the funds will go to. And lastly, STFNA, there's funds for an Indigenous Youth Fellowship. I think they're gonna hire another, I think, 10 to 20 young people, Indigenous youth, to work in members of council's offices, which is always a positive thing. So that's where this budget stands right now. I think from the position of the TYC and the many consultations we've done with young people, if you ask, what are your thoughts on this budget, Stephen? I'd argue, and we are going to say, like, we believe this staff budget does fall short in respects to meaningfully improving young people's socioeconomic conditions and ensuring that young people have access to the opportunities they need to drive and succeed in the city of Toronto. Many may know, and I know Social Plan has been a big ally and support in this is we are pushing in partnership with the neighborhood group community services for the city to create a youth employment program to provide an additional 10,000 jobs for young people, more specifically Black, Indigenous youth, equity deserving youth, young people experiencing homelessness, young people at risk of involvement in violence and crime. We know there's been a rise in youth violence and acts of criminality being disproportionately perpetrated by youth, be it when we talk about carjackings, jewelry store robberies, so on and so forth. Young people are disproportionately being arrested and charged with those acts of criminality. And what we're hearing from young people is they need opportunity. They need income, but they need opportunity. A job is not just going to provide a young person with money, but also going to give them hope for a better future. And many of our young people in Toronto, especially our most vulnerable youth, unfortunately have lost that hope. And this budget, Mayor Charles' budget that's going to be released by February 1st, has the potential to give young people a renewed hope and sense of purpose in the city of Toronto. And so we are going to be seeking more investments to expand youth employment opportunities for young people, especially young people who live in Toronto community housing. I'll give an example quickly. Every year they have a summer youth employment program. One of them is called Youth Works. And last year, over 580 young people, dressed up, looked great, went to a job fair, job interview to get interviewed by staff. Yet TCAC only had enough funding to hire 90 young people. So the message is, what are we going to tell those over 490 young people who came out dressed up, looking and ready to get a job, but unfortunately there wasn't enough funding to hire those youth. And we know every year those numbers continue to increase. So one thing we're going to be seeking is for Mayor Chow to invest meaningfully to enhance youth employment opportunities in Toronto community housing. I think another aspect too, thankfully we're gonna get more youth hubs, but we also want to put a renewed focus on enhanced youth spaces. Enhanced youth spaces are operated under Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. And the difference between the youth hubs and youth spaces, I describe it as youth hubs, they're in a library, there's only so much noise and movement you can make within a library, whereas enhanced youth spaces, you're able to do more sports and other active involvement with your peers that youth hubs do not allow. And so we are seeking an additional 15 enhanced youth spaces to once again get us to that point to ensure every neighborhood improvement area and priority neighborhood has a youth space. I think high level, I'll also mention youth homelessness. That's a big one. And we are seeking for an additional youth shelter beds, but even more so to increase the amount of young people who are moved from the shelter system into transitional and supportive housing. Last time I checked, there's over 1,100 young people who've encountered our shelter system. So those are young people who are experiencing homelessness, but that doesn't even count the data of young people who are experiencing hidden homelessness and those who are couch surfing, so on and so forth, which we know is over 2,000 young people in the city of Toronto. And so it's so important that the city invests meaningfully in youth shelter beds, but as well as increases their number of young people moved into the shelter, moved out of the shelter system into permanent housing. And unfortunately, when you check the city's data, those numbers have decreased every year and not increased, which is not the trajectory that we want to go on. I think another thing I'll reinforce is the last two is mental health. There's a program called Community Healing Project that the city has. It was federally funded. We're hoping for the city to take that on as well, and that really helps to address the root causes of gang involvement and increases protections for young people exposed to violence, which is so important. And lastly, there's a grant that TYC actually pushed for back in 2006. It's called an Identify and Impact grant program. And this is where we give funds to grassroots youth-led organizations to really support them and build the capacity to support other young people. One thing I'm always saying is we can't say that we're investing in young people if we're not willing to invest in their ideas. And so this grassroots grant program does exactly that. It gives funding to grassroots youth organizations to support other young people in their communities and build their capacity and empower them. So that's another investment that we're hoping for the city of Toronto to make. Next week, we're going to be rolling out our push on this more formally, where your folks will be able to see how we're costing it. I think lastly, as I wrap up, the one thing I will say is, we say as a society we care more about prevention more than intervention. We say that we want to go upstream, but then we continuously make downstream investments. Right now we're seeing the police are going to get an extra 46.2 million, which we know is actually going to be even bigger than 46.2 million. And I think for me, I always say it doesn't come from an anti-police rhetoric, but rather just a pro-common sense rhetoric, which is, hey, if you want to thrive in safe city, instead of us, putting more boots on the ground, let's give young people the opportunity to, take control of their life, give them hope for a better future, and that's going to make Toronto more equitable and more youth-friendly. So I'll pause there. There's more new investments that we're going to be seeking that the city hasn't already made, but like I said, folks can look out for that next week when the Toronto Youth Cabinet releases our ask.
Stephen, thank you so much. Very, very well said. SBT's been supporting that call in all of our asks around youth unemployment. And I recently learned how underfunded youth shelters are. So thank you for highlighting that. I know you have to leave us, but we'll make sure if there's questions that we can't answer during the Q&A, we'll make sure you're connected to folks. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a great one, folks.
Up next, I'm going to invite August and Nigel from TTC Riders to unpack the 2025 TTC budget. August is a community planner with TTC Riders, and Nigel Morton is the campaign manager at TTC Riders. August is a community planner with the Transit Advocacy Group. They are students at Toronto Metropolitan University, and they are from North York and care about livable cities with great transit. Nigel is managing the campaign for federal funding for the TTC, which recently helped win funding for new trains on Line 2 Bloor Danforth. Nigel grew up in Toronto and wants to see the TTC become everyone's first choice for getting around. Thank you so much for joining us, Nigel and August. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the intro, and I'll just share my screen. Okay, so we'll try to quickly go through the TTC budget. Overall, we're pretty happy. Last week on Friday, we spoke up at the TTC board, and they passed the TTC budget. What we did is we supported including the fare freeze, and we asked for even more improvements like fare capping, which we'll talk about later. We supported the service improvements, which passed, and that includes a lot of improvements to bus and streetcar service outside of the rush hour, which a lot more women, people of lower income, shift workers tend to use TTC during the off-peak hours, so we're happy to see that service improvement reflect that. But it doesn't go necessarily far enough. We asked for the return of free Wi-Fi, but we didn't see that in the budget. And we supported investments into the repair of the TTC, because if you've taken the subway lately, you've probably noticed it's quite slow, it's unreliable, there's often many delays, and that has to do with the state of the repair on the TTC. So we're happy to see investment there. And we asked for a ridership growth strategy to, actually increase number of people using transit so we can meet our climate goals and make our city more equitable and livable. And I'll pass this on to Nigel to talk about what's missing.
Thanks, August. So yeah, we do see some, as much as the TTC budget is, we're overall, fairly happy. There are things that are definitely missing. So the first one, even though there are investments in improving TTC service, we can see that not enough money is being allocated to actually achieve those goals. So according to the budget itself, there are unfunded portions of that commitment. So that's something that is a concern for sure, and we'll talk about maybe some ways that we can accomplish fully funding those commitments later on. Slow zones, as August talked about, there's a big commitment in reducing the state of good repair backlog, so improving the repair and maintenance ability of the TTC, but there's no commitment to ending slow zones. There's no discussion about what it would take to get rid of slow zones. And just so everyone knows, slow zones, they're officially called restricted speed zones, but they're portions of the subway where the subway has to slow down and go a certain speed because the tracks themselves are in such bad condition. And they're either being actively repaired or can't, in order to be safe, the subway has to slow down. We've heard that from the CEO, the current interim CEO, that there are always going to be slow zones. But we also, just at the end of last year, we saw that Boston got their slow zones on their subway system down to 0. And so we want to see that happen in Toronto as well. We also, there's no current stable funding for operations, meaning essentially service. So hiring drivers and making sure that there's enough buses, streetcars, subways running at any given time. We'll talk a bit about, so you can see parking levy is brought up on this slide here. We'll talk a bit about that soon, but also provincial and federal funding are ways that we can address this need for stable operations funding. There's, according to a report that the city put out recently, we can see that the TTC is actually losing $1.2 million a week to people choosing to take things like Uber and other ride-hailing options instead of taking the TTC. And so far, we haven't seen any kind of plan to address that, to bring people back to the TTC from Uber or things like that. And that's obviously a lot of money a week and a lot of money per year that the TTC is losing to people making that choice. August mentioned we asked for public Wi-Fi. It was ended in December and was not in this budget. And we want to see a fully funded fare pass low income discount. Right now, It's been at the same level for some time. The program's never been fully funded to expand the people who are eligible to use the Fair Pass discount. And so we really want to see that happen. So I'll go on to, the specific things that we're asking for in the city budget. Like I said, the TTC budget has passed, but there's still things that we are making sure that we say throughout the consultation process and as the city budget comes up. So the first one is supporting the fare freeze. This year in the TTC budget, fares are not going to be increasing. They're going to remain the same, which is really important for a number of reasons. It obviously helps keep the TTC from becoming more unaffordable. And there are going to be councillors who are likely opposed to a fare freeze. And so showing support for this is going to be really important as we go through this process. The TTC does rely on fares more than any other transit system in North America. And that's one reason why we also want to see stable funding for operations, something that's not relying on fares, but is some separate and permanent funding model for operations. You can see here that, so we all know how bad inflation has been. It's been awful for the prices of just about everything. And TTC fares have risen even faster than inflation over the past 30 years. So this fare freeze is really important to, at the very least, help bring TTC fares back in line with inflation, which obviously not the end goal, but at this point, when you can see the difference between where actual costs are versus what they would be indexed to inflation, that's a pretty stark difference. I'll pass off to August.
So now I'll talk a bit about fare capping, which is we hope to be kind of the next step for fare affordability in the city. It's a program that allows transit users to ride free after they pay a certain number of times in a day or a week or a month. And you might have used it before on Go Transit. When you hit 40 trips on Go Transit, you ride for free after. And it exists in other cities too, Edmonton, Hamilton, New York, Portland, lots of different cities. And it's a pay-as-you-go program as opposed to pay up front. So one of the biggest barriers to a monthly pass is the fact that you have to actually pay $156 at the start of every month. A lot of people don't have that. I don't have that income. So it's a great barrier for people to access TTC discount. This is why we're pushing so hard for fare capping. And the TTC board has actually endorsed fare capping already in 2022 in its 5-year fare plan. And we're 3 years into that plan and we don't actually see a report back. So we're urging city councillors to report back on the costs and the options for a fare capping program for the TTC because we'd like to see it implemented. And just an update about the fare pass. This isn't funded in the TTC budget, but it's in part of the SDFA. This is a low income discount for TTC users. It brings fares to $2.10 and the monthly pass to $123. It's been approved in 2016, but as Nigel mentioned, it's never actually been fully funded. Phase 1 was for Ontario Works and ODSP recipients, and it's expanded to Phase 2 and to Phase 3 as of recently. Oh, sorry, it's expanded to Phase 2, but it hasn't actually reached Phase 3 where it would allow people earning the low income measure and over 15% of it to qualify. Right now, it's at 75% of the low income measure, so 25% below, meaning a lot of people who are low income don't actually qualify for the fare pass, and it's not benefiting a lot of low income households in Toronto. So it's clearly not enough, and we didn't see any update to this in the budget. I'll also talk a bit about keeping and expanding free Wi-Fi. Back in September, they voted to scrap public Wi-Fi and TTC stations without an equity analysis or a cost breakdown of the Rogers quote of 70 million to keep and update the Wi-Fi infrastructure. And so Wi-Fi ended on December 27th last year. Thousands of riders who cannot afford cell service relied on it to navigate, during emergencies, access the Safe TTC app, or to find out accessibility information, like where are the elevators, or are the elevators working? So it's really important for accessibility and really important for equity, because not everyone can afford cell service. They might run out of that at the end of the month, or they just can't afford a cell plan in the first place. So we're asking councillors to reinstate our public Wi-Fi. We had no success at a TTC board, so we're hoping at City Council during the city budget we'll keep asking and keep asking. And we've been advocating on this with Acorn as well. It costs 11 million plus $1 million a year to operate, according to a source in the Toronto Star. And I'll pass it back to Nigel to talk about the commercial parking levy.
Thanks, August. And this will be our last slide, but I mentioned the commercial parking levy earlier on, and this is one way that we can see a stable funding source for the TTC, but also just the city in general. So when we're being asked, how do we fund these things that we're all asking for, this is a really great response. So the commercial parking levy, it's projected to bring in around $150 million a year if it gets approved and implemented. And what it does is it charges big commercial landlords, big box stores that have large parking lots for each basically parking space in the parking lot. It does exclude small parking lots, so parking lots of, I think it's like 300 square meters, something like, I can't remember exactly what the amount is right off the top of my head, but smaller parking lots, I think it's maybe 10 spots, are excluded from this, but big parking lots would have the levy applied. So a shopping mall like Yorkdale, where there's a picture at the start of the presentation where we were doing some Christmas caroling and outreach around the parking levy. A mall like Yorkdale that has a subway station that delivers people directly to it, that it doesn't pay its share for, would have to pitch in. And Yorkdale in particular, it's on a subway line that has a ton of slow zones. It's a very frustrating place to take the TTC, especially if you're trying to get somewhere for a specific time. And it's not contributing enough to that service. So malls like Yorkdale, like the Eden Center, like Fairview, are really great examples of places where, the TTC is dropping people right at their front door, but they're not contributing the way they should. So this commercial parking levy would get them to pitch in. It would also make the city, less reliant on turning up property taxes without saying whether that should or shouldn't be happening. But it provides another source of income, where the city's quite limited in the options that it has. I think that's everything. So yeah, those are the asks that we have, and that we're hoping to bring to the deputations, the consultations over the next couple weeks, and hoping that we see the parking levy brought up by council and voted on. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, August and Nigel, for breaking that all down for us. And we are happy to partner with you to support the commercial parking levy. For those of you who want to know more, we are hosting an event next Thursday. We're expecting the executive committee to hear a report about the commercial parking levy. We'll post a link to that in the chat so you can learn more about how we might be able to better fund our city through these new revenue sources. So appreciate all the information about the impacts for transit riders in this upcoming budget. I'm going to call on Daniela Leacock next to shed some light on the drop in budget and the impact to the closure of the supervised consumption sites. Daniela is the manager of the Toronto Drop-In Network. She is a proud Black, queer, Caribbean woman deeply committed to community care and advocacy. As the manager of the Toronto Drop-In Network, Daniela brings extensive experience in the drop-in, harm reduction, mental health, and HIV sectors. Rooted in respect and gratitude for those who have paved the way, she approaches her work with compassion and dedication to uplifting marginalized voices. She continues to prioritize joy within her personal and professional life and loves swimming, trying new restaurants with friends, and going to the Toronto Islands in the summer. Thanks for joining us today, Daniela. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Happy to be here. Okay, great. So I'm going to be chatting today with everyone about the proposed drop-in budget. So we can go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So within the city's 2025 budget, they made a lot of claims around this like commitment to maintaining critical services and service level. That was really something that was highlighted in the budget launch. But then I think like, the more and more you review the budget, it shows as though that's not being reflected, especially as it pertains to drop-ins. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there really is like no maintaining of critical services and service level when we're continuing to see an increase of folks accessing services and this unmet demand occurring. So within the city's budget this year, they even said it themselves that they will not be able to keep up with the shelter demand. And I'm sure like Diana will speak about this a bit later on. The shelter demand is really forecasted to continue to outweigh the support that's being able to be provided by the city, even with their like proposed increase in spaces of 12,000, of it going up to 12,235. This still will not meet the demands of the sector, and this increase in demand for services for underhoused folks continues to be seen at the drop-in level. But we're not seeing that like increase in funding from the city. It's not being reflected in the city's budget. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in 2024, 22 different city-funded drop-ins received an increase in funding of $1 million, putting the total funding for all of the city-funded drop-ins at 5.9 million. And that increase really came as a lack of a cost of living increase that didn't happen between the years of 2022 to 2024. And so now for this year, the proposed budget is $6.3 million, which is about a $400,000 increase in the budget from last year, which is really just to keep up with the cost of living increases that we're seeing in Toronto. And then you'll also see in the new and enhanced services for the 2025 budget, the city has set aside an additional $380K to support with enhanced drop-in hours during the winter months. And so, of course, like these increases are welcomed and exciting, but also it really does not keep up with the growing demand that we're seeing within the drop-in sector. And this funding doesn't maintain services at all, but really neglects to support the critical services that are available and like need to be available in Toronto. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So really, in addition to the increase in services that we are witnessing at the drop-ins as a result of the housing crisis in Toronto, as a result of the cost of living in Toronto, the closure of these five of Toronto's main supervised consumption sites that's coming by March 31st is really going to result in a drastic number of folks accessing supports and services at the drop-ins. At the drop-ins, it's going to result in an increase in number of folks using substances in and around the drop-ins. And sadly, it's going to result in an increase in overdose deaths, which is going to severely impact frontline workers, drop-in workers, shelter workers, and our communities in general. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so in reviewing the city's budget and the budget notes, there really is barely any mention to the impact of this closure of the supervised consumption sites on the shelter system and the drop-ins. And for me, this feels a bit surprising because in 2024, in August, a spokesperson from the mayor's office really pointed out that she was someone that was concerned about the closures and recognized that, these closures could lead to increased number of overdose deaths, greater strain on first responders and emergency rooms, and more public drug use. And so this is exactly what we're going to see if we don't see a proper investment from the city in the drop-ins and shelters. And so this sentence here is what was seen in one of the budget notes. And so it reads, the Ontario government's changing legislation related to supervised consumption sites, as well as the growth of encampments, may present risk and challenges for people experiencing homelessness and sleeping outdoors in Toronto. So yeah, I mean, this statement really does not address how the city is going to be adequately supporting the drop-in spaces, the shelter spaces, and the outreach teams, who are ultimately, these are the first responders when it comes to overdoses. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So to rectify this, TDIN is putting forward two different requests towards the city for this proposed budget. The first one is an increase of $3 million to the current drop-in budget. I know that sounds like a lot, but I think, when we're thinking of this money coming from property taxes, $3 million split between all of the properties in Toronto, it's not too much. And so this additional funding would enable the drop-ins to enhance the resources at the drop-in level. So that's increasing funding for meals, for food, for critical support such as hygiene kits. It's expanding the staff to meet the growing needs that we're seeing. So it's hiring additional full-time staff, specifically trained community outreach workers to address the expected influx in service users, and these specialized staff to be able to focus on overdose response and support to ensure that the regular programming that's happening in the drop-ins is not disrupted. And also to enhance the Creating Health Plus budget. So Creating Health Plus is a program that provides healthy, sustainable, fresh foods to about 47 different drop-ins across the city weekly. And so enhancing their funding to be able to continue to support these drop-ins and their growing demands. Go to the next slide. And then the second ask is around an investment from the city of $500,000 towards the mental health and well-being of drop-in workers, city-funded shelter workers, and outreach workers, as these are really the main folks that are going to be, some of the main folks that are going to be directly impacted by the closure of these sites. So the current budget, within that new and enhanced services section, it states that there's this one-time funding of $580,000 for staff equity and wellness initiatives, specifically for city-run shelter workers. However, there's no support allocated for drop-in workers, for city-funded shelter workers, or outreach workers. And so our hope is that an additional $500K can go towards supporting this already existing program called GLOW, which is a grief and wellness initiative by Breakaway Services, which provides free, accessible support services to frontline workers impacted by the trauma and ongoing loss associated with the overdose crisis. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, those are the main points that TDIN are going to be focusing on at the deputations next week. I know as of right now, they are full, but I think there is still an opportunity to send in written deputations. So it would be fantastic if folks are interested in joining us in demanding better resources and supports for the drop-ins and better supports for our frontline staff. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for letting us know what's happening in the drop-in sector and sharing those real important priorities that we want to see increased investments for this year in this year's budget. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Diana Chan McNally to speak next. Diana is a longtime community worker and advocate, and she's going to give her take on the investments in homelessness in this year's budget. Diana is a longtime frontline community worker and advocate for advancing the rights of homeless people, particularly in encampments. She is currently employed by the Shift, a global housing rights organization, and also volunteers with St. Luke's Out of the Cold drop-in meal program. Thank you so much for joining us, Diana. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks so much. To start on the issue of homelessness, I want to note that a whopping 67% of budget survey respondents cited that building affordable housing and shelters was the top priority for investment in the 2025 budget. And to me, this overwhelmingly suggests that Torontonians at large really want to tackle the homelessness crisis in the city. Now, that said, the investments from the city in this year's budget for services, and you just heard from Daniela, it's pretty modest, and I don't think is going to meet the need. So overall, we have a 6.1% increase, which is about $51.6 million for Toronto shelter support services. I always still call it SSHA, it's TSSS now. And this includes $4.6 million for new and enhanced programming and services, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now that said, even though this is very, very modest as an increase, we also have to keep in mind that as a condition of the new deal that was brokered between Mayor Olivia Chow as well as Premier Doug Ford, we have $200 million a year until the end of 2026 coming from the provincial government specifically for shelters and homelessness services. So I think what we're seeing is that we're cutting back a little bit in the city's own investments because in this moment, we have a little bit more investment from both the provincial government, but also from the federal government. So the other piece is that funding for our shelter system is also being bolstered by a short-term investment from the federal government for refugees in the shelter system. And I'm sure you remember the refugee shelter crisis from last year. It is ongoing. It has not dissipated at all. And so last year we saw the federal government commit $250 million overall. But I think the city is gambling a little bit here. So this federal funding is actually uncertain at this moment. And what we're seeing in the budget is that the city is making an assumption that we should get at least $250 million again. And they've actually requested to increase that to $300 million from the federal government. But the caveat here is that the feds have actually said that we may be cutting back on refugee funding, again, even though the crisis is still ongoing. So what they have said is that they will cut it back by 75% this year and by a further 50% in 2026. So when I say the city is gambling, we're including this money as though it absolutely is going to happen in the budget at large as we've seen it now, but it may not actually materialize. So this is all very much subject to change. It's a big caveat that we have on our hands. And onto the services themselves, as you saw in Daniela's presentation, we are actually increasing the number of shelter beds that are available. So we're increasing it to 12,235 beds. It is not going to be enough. And the city knows this. We all know this. It simply is not going to actually meet the need. What we saw in the 2024 budget is that the city increased shelter capacity to 10,600 beds. And as of right now, we have about 11,700 beds in the shelter system at this moment. And that includes about 300 beds, which are included in the warming center statistics, as well as in temporary 24/7 spaces. So it fluctuates seasonally by about 300 or so spaces. Now, this increase in beds in 2025 to 12,235, it's not nothing. And I'll say at least this much for the city. And it actually represents an increase of slightly over 15% from the beginning of, well, really the end of 2023 until now. So 15% increase isn't nothing. But as I said, the number of folks who are actually homeless in Toronto, it's going to far exceed the number of beds that are actually available, which is going to be really problematic because, as we know, we have a lot of visible homelessness in our city, and we expect that it's actually going to increase no matter what, even with this increase of beds. And I want to say the reason why you may see more people who are homeless and more people outside isn't just because of the number of beds are available. It's not as simplistic as just building all the beds to meet the moment. But across Ontario, we have no positive exits out of homelessness, none. That means that there is no housing available. So whereas over a decade ago, a single shelter bed might have turnover of about 5-6 people per year using that one bed and then exiting it out of homelessness and into housing, we have now just 2 people a year who are accessing a bed. That is a huge shift in turnover. And all of this is because that people are just stuck in shelters because there is a lack of housing. And again, that is primarily a provincial responsibility, although all orders of government are involved. But I think we really have to point the finger at the culprit here, which is largely the province. And of course, the lack of turnover in shelter beds was really exacerbated last year. So if you kind of dig into the details of the budget, you'll see that we've actually moved 50% less people out of the shelter system in 2024 than we did in 2023. Why is that? It's actually because Doug Ford, inexplicably, no reason at all, delayed rent supplements. So funding for rent supplements that was supposed to be distributed to the city of Toronto. It was delayed for 6 months. And this means that we moved out far fewer people from the shelter system than we did in the previous year, which also means that it's going to be harder to move more people into the system temporarily until we can have that housing. And unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to have housing for any period of time, which is to say, again, the shelter system will remain full. We'll see very little turnover, and we're going to see visible homelessness continue to grow. Again, 67% of Torontonians said this is the highest priority, but we are not going to actually tackle very much, I think, in this budget, and also in large part because of the province and of course the federal government just not fulfilling their responsibilities either. About 20,000 people actually accessed a shelter bed last year. Sorry, unique people, individual people. That's a lot of people. That's substantial, I would say. 20,000 people became homeless and tried to access a shelter bed. I correct myself here by calling central intake, but only about 5,000 of them were actually able to access a bed. So you had 15,000 unique people who were attempting to access a bed, but who were not able to because of the stagnant turnover in the shelter system. It's very dark. All I'm saying is very dark. Onto the budget numbers. So the increase of 51.6 million will be allocated to, one is encampment response, so 8.8 million, refugee response, so 21 million for bridging programs for refugee families, as well as for pregnant women. And this is in large part because we've seen that there are 1,400 homeless children and babies in our shelter system right now. So we're prioritizing children in this case, and we're seeing that the majority of the children who are becoming homeless and in the shelter system are actually the children of refugees. This is also going to staff salaries and benefits, an inflationary increase to contracted services, so catering for meals, for example, as well as investments in the shelter infrastructure plan. So $7 million for 6 new shelters, which will total about 450 beds, plus funding for state of good repair for aging infrastructure, which if you know anything about shelters and you've ever seen the inside of a shelter, it is a good thing. That we were actually going to invest in state of good repair here. And as well, we're putting about $7 million into the Social Housing Stabilization Reserve. But I want to talk about the new programs that we have. So importantly, one thing that I've been yelling about for a very long time, other people have been yelling about this for a very long time, and was actually recommended to the city through the Board of Health, is that we actually establish a service user advisory group in the city of Toronto. Been talking about this for years. We've all been talking about this for years. And it looks like this year this is finally going to happen. We are actually allocating $125,000 to the creation of an advisory group. Right now, there actually is no formal mechanism for service users to have any kind of input or control over shelter or other homeless services, which is nuts. Because as a member of the public, if you have a problem with the public service that you're using, there's usually some kind of mechanism for you to actually lodge a complaint that will actually go somewhere. You have some sort of input into how services are being run. But generally speaking, if you're homeless, this doesn't really exist. So I think this is a really good thing. It's critically important, but as with all things politics, I think we have to be really vigilant to ensure that this group, this advisory group, has actually real and substantive power. It can't be something that's tokenistic. And so I, for one, will be making sure that it isn't that, as I'm sure many other people will be. We will also be creating a specialized program for people with complex needs. And these are typically people who are kicked out of services, who frequently intersect with police, and who have ongoing and frequently unmet healthcare needs. It's actually a really tiny percentage of people who are unhoused who comprise this group, but at the same time, there's a lot of resources that are committed to this very small group, usually through policing, unfortunately, and also, again, through healthcare. There's a very, very high cost attached to both of those things. So it looks like we're actually going to create some kind of program. We'll see what that looks like. I'm sure I'll be keeping eyes on this. I'm being probably very involved in deputing on it to make sure that folks actually have dedicated services and workers who are typically kicked out of everywhere else. So done right, and there's a really big asterisk attached to that, I think this is potentially a good initiative. We're also going to see an increased presence of outreach workers on transit, as well as frontline staff for the encampment response, so that services can operate now 7 days a week instead of 5. And so that's what the investment, the $8 million investment in the encampment response is to make it a 7 days a week program. But I just talked about how the shelter system is full. I just talked about how we don't actually have any housing available. So I deeply question what kind of role these staff will play and what exactly the added value is of expanding the number of days a week from 5 to 7. Is that now we might get evictions 7 days a week? I don't think that's necessarily a very good thing. Well, not necessarily. It is not a good thing. So I'm going to be probing into this a little bit to understand what exactly it means when they're expanding services and what exactly is going to be offered to people if we're going to be expanding the encampment response. So that's my take in a nutshell about what's going on, and there's so much more, but I'll be sticking around for questions as well, so thank you.
Diana, thank you so much for breaking down that budget. It is and showing us how things are rolling out. It's really incredibly helpful to understand what we're seeing on the ground versus what's happening. Next, I'd like to call up Saman. Saman Tabasinejad is the Executive Director at Progress Toronto. She has degrees in political science and anthropology, and she is particularly interested in how large policy decisions affect everyday lives. Saman is dedicated to building a progressive city and making room for women, especially young racialized women, to take space, influence policy making, and run for office. And Saman is here to share her analysis on the police budget. Thanks for joining us, Saman.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for everyone for sharing your insights and your analyses. So I know we already kind of spoke a little bit about the police budget. It is a massive increase in the budget, and you know it's a little bit, it's quite different, I guess you could say, than last year's the way that last year's police budget unfolded. So I just want to, I'm just gonna, sorry, I want to put my notes next to the screen. So we're in a position with the police budget where it's like the second largest line in the budget. Right now it's at $46.2 million increase. That's a 3.9%. In their budget, and it doesn't include the millions, probably more, like very honestly, hundreds of millions of dollars that will be included in it during or because of the collective bargaining agreement. And I'm just going to go through maybe something about like how we got here this year and what the political context is and what's next. So if you remember from last year, there was a massive fight between the mayor and the police union and the police service on making sure that they got their $12.6 million. So if you remember, there was a gap between what the police board had approved and what the staff budget and the mayor's budget included, which was a $12.6 million. That's not happening that hasn't happened yet this year. What the police board has asked for is in the staff budget. There was last year at last year's city or budget meeting, there was a motion for the police to get the $12.6 million that won 21-6. And the mayor voted for it, as well as the budget chief, and almost every other city councilor besides 5. And so we're in this scenario politically where it doesn't seem like there is the political will of any politicians that's really like wants to champion putting a freeze, let alone cutting the police budget to fund other services that we know do a better job of addressing some of the root causes of crime, or investing in services that can really impact people's lives. I know that what was kind of stood out to me throughout this entire presentation is that we're seeing like $1 million increase here, $800,000 increase here, and then meanwhile we're seeing a $46.2 million increase. That's just 3.9% of the police budget. So it's quite the contrast. And in the past year, Progress Toronto, alongside other groups, have really been getting involved in the city budget, the police board conversations in the past. And I think that this is like a learning point for us, and I'll get into a little bit more. But in the past, I know that even during John Tory's time, for instance, a lot of advocates were really focused on the budget conversations and just particularly in the months of January and February. But I do think that like long term, shifting over our energies into really focusing on freezing or cutting the police budget within the context of the police board is our next step in being able to achieve these changes. So in the past year, a lot of our advocates have been really focused on something called the staffing, the long-term staffing plan for the TPS, and that was one condition within the 2024 budget increase for the TPS to establish a responsible kind of like long-term vision for what the staffing plan looks like. Unfortunately, despite this kind of being an opportunity to look for ways to decrease the staffing or at least flatline the staffing, unfortunately, what was proposed and ultimately supported by the TPS was an increase in staffing. So that is, and they did cite two main reasons. One was the FIFA World Cup, the events that are coming up, as like cited reasons for like needed more security, and another one being the cop per pop, the cop for pop protocol or standard, which is the idea that to bring up the average of police officers in line with how many residents there are, and oftentimes the TPS unfortunately looks to other cities as like rationale to increase their own. For instance, looking at Chicago or another state or other cities, not saying that there is no actual correlation between increasing police officers and safety or even decrease of crime. So as we kind of like go into the budget, like I said, it's this how we have been kind of have analyzed what's going on at the police board as well as the police budget. There needs to be like a long-term vision for how we can be able to cut or freeze the police budget at their massive in their massive budget cost right now. So like, you know, they're over $1.3 billion. Unfortunately, with how the votes kind of shook out last year, which was a 21-5 to increase the police budget, we assume it's going to be something similar. There may be a scenario where a councillor does bring a motion to cut the increase and redirect it to some other service. That will likely still lose. And it's just, and so from our perspective, the real opportunity is to make sure that we're still having this conversation about the police still front line. So Progress Toronto will continue its ask of having a 0% budget increase and to find efficiencies within their existing budget. And those efficiencies are anything between like having instituting bunching protocols, which would make sure that there aren't like 6 police cars showing up to, you know, a noise complaint or domestic violence complaint. Some proportionality in terms of how many police officers showing up to a call. So having 1 cop per car to make sure that we're not like multiplying again, like doubling up the shifts, and then capping overtime, which right now is over like $45 million from the last I saw, which is essentially the capping. So one of the biggest ways that police officers get, you know, over their salary is because they are charging for overtime, and overtime is a premium pay in a lot of the police documents. And that means that they, it's a way of kind of also increasing their own salary. So having like capping that overtime pay will also help decrease the budget and add a cap. So from that perspective, Progress Toronto is really focused on that 0% increase alongside some of these key policy changes. And there is, okay, yes, I will finish. Sorry, I just saw I am going after overtime, I guess. And so what do we do now in the deputations? one of the most effective ways we have seen is being able to speak about the reduction or the freezing of the police budget or their increase in relation to other services. So let's say that the crisis response, the respite spaces, et cetera, increasing operations in other places. And then that's what we will be asking for in during the deputations and in this budget. However, the real push will be through the police board. And we have another opportunity to address this with the strategic plan that is coming up. So the police will be providing a strategic plan, and that's another opportunity to try to rein in their spending and include some accountability in their budget. Thanks.
Saman, thank you so much. The police budget is always difficult to sift through, and we've been calling for it. And I really appreciate the work that Progress Toronto has been doing on this to really push for change. And we'll keep working with you on this. Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up for questions. We have a couple minutes. We can answer a couple questions. We've been asking for everyone, for folks to send in questions in the chat. But if you haven't been able to do that, we can, well, please put up your hand using the raise hand function, and we can call on you to speak. We did have one question in the chat earlier about the proposed police budget, and what SUT thinks that it should be reduced to. I'm also seeing a question in the chat. In the budget around universal design, from Kim. Sorry, my chat is too small for me to view.
Hi, Melissa. Do you want me to read it? It's Kim here.
Yes, please, Kim, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks everyone for all your work today. I really appreciate it. I'm working on my deputation, and this has helped me so much in terms of breaking down the budget, and I couldn't do it all on my own. So I really appreciate your work today. So I've noticed two critical, I'm just going to read what I just posted. I've noticed two critical gaps in the budget so far. No mention of increasing funding for accessible or adaptable housing, otherwise known as universal design, when identifying the need for affordable housing, as well as increasing accessible shelter and supportive housing spaces. These omissions force disabled people into deeper poverty and higher risk of houselessness. Also, nothing about increasing funding to Wheel-Trans, even though this was a key focus during the last TTC board meeting, where quite a few disabled community members clearly made this call to the board and to the city. So especially those impacted by TTC's family of services. And then I just have thoughts, ? So anyone wish to comment or get back to me?
Just realized it was muted. I apologize. Kim, those are great questions. I am wondering if August or Nigel might be able to answer the question about Wheel-Trans. I'm not sure about the question around universal design. If somebody here has an answer, please let us know either in the chat or put your hand up. Something I was wondering about myself.
Well, yeah, and accessible housing, right, needs to be considered when we talk about increasing affordable housing, especially deeply affordable housing. So I haven't been able to pull any of that from the budget launch document. So I may be missing something, but if I'm not, that would be comforting to know, because I will
Melissa Goldstein also just shared a report on the staff report on supportive housing. It's not the same as the issues around universal design, but it might have additional information related to that. So hopefully that will provide.
That's great. Thanks, Melissa.
August or Nigel, are you able to share any of the details around, if you're still here, any of the details about Wheel-Trans?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about Wheel-Trans. So yeah, last year we had that big meeting where we were talking about family of services. We released a report about how it's disproportionately impacting a lot of people living out in the outer suburbs who need accessible transit the most. We got counselors on the TTC board to say that they're not planning to implement family of services. I don't know if that's really a hard commitment, but it is a win in the sense that it's not at least happening this year. So that's good. In terms of the Wheel-Trans budget, it is going up, but the increase is just the regular amount that they tend to increase every year, and it's actually smaller than the amount of funding that was increased in the last couple of years. So even though the funding for Wheel-Trans is going up, it's a smaller percentage, and it's really just to accommodate growth. It doesn't actually mean that there might be better Wheel-Trans service at all. Might even be worse. So we'll see how Wheel-Trans is impacted in the coming year. We should be calling for more funding and getting an actual commitment to not ending door-to-door service through family of services. So we'll keep fighting for that through the new year.
Thanks, August. That's what I was looking for, that like if there's going to be an increase to funding. So yes, but not as much. That's awesome. Thanks, August.
Thanks for answering that question. And Sarah, thanks for sharing those items on increasing accessible housing. So hopefully that's helpful for you, Kim. As well, we did have a few comments about poverty reduction. That is something that Social Planning Toronto is going to be looking at in budget and calling for, but we still, as you know, have not seen the third term action plan for the poverty reduction strategy, something that SPT will be calling for in our work. And so and there was the ask about what we want to see the Toronto Police budget reduced to. I think that's a challenging question to ask, but I think our speakers today touched on a lot of things and what we want to see around accountability. It's something, there's a lot of things that the city budget, the police budget increase could look at. That all that money being spent on the police budget increase, the additional staffing. There are many ways that could be used instead of investing in community services. So that's always something that SPD looks at in the budget, is how could these investments be better used to serve our communities, address the root causes of violence, and it's something that we'll continue to do in our work. We're very close to our end of our time. I know Tamid was going to share some highlights. Tamid, if you're able to unmute, it'd be great to have just a quick, very brief summary wrap up of our conversation. There's been so much shared today, and I know there's been folks sharing a lot in the chat. Lots about seniors and the importance of investing in and looking at the investments that we need to support our aging communities. So thank you for everybody who's been participating in that. Tamid?
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. I'll try to respect everybody's time and keep it very short and sweet. Remarkable talks, but I think the key things we can take home with us this evening is that, the budget, as Beth started us off, is one of the most important decisions made by the mayor and council. And the mayor's budget will come out around February 1st, give or take a few days. But, there is some hope. Some of us are asking for increases in regards to, the temporary shelter spaces. Some of us want to see increases or categories that are not addressed. So there is some hope, and there will be deputations upcoming. I know SPT and partners will be doing training on deputation, and ultimately there will be a rally on February 11th at City Hall, and all these details are on the website and to be shared. So we're at a point in juncture. We will keep hopefully advocating and doing the great work in the communities and with our partners that we do. And there's a lot of questions that have been raised. There is extra money for policing, yet there's limited additional enhanced investments for poverty related items. And that sort of begs the question. It's great to say that the budget is really looking for making life affordable, getting Toronto moving, providing community services and keeping people safe, but are the actual allocations really addressing those issues? And we will differ on the ways those items can better address those key priority areas. And a lot has been said about that today in terms of areas where things are successful, such as Mura. Sara had an amazing presentation with details, but why not increase investments in areas that are working, and where is the enhanced funding for those programs, and why not try to do more? And then the glaring gaps when it comes to Stefan talked about youth employment, why not do more in terms of youth funding for alternative spaces beyond just the 2 additional drop-ins? So lots of areas that we need to push for, we need to advocate for, and let's keep the conversation going.
Saman, thank you so much for sharing that wrap up and for sharing our upcoming events. So the links to our events have been shared in the chat. We encourage you to come out, join one of the deputation workshops, and as well as our rally. And of course, make sure your voice is heard during the deputations that are happening next week in the town halls. We really, really want to thank our speakers today. We didn't have a ton of time for discussion today, but I've learned so much about this year's budget through our speakers. Thank you so much for your incredible analysis and for being the advocates that you are for building a better city. Really appreciate it. And just want to thank you all, and we hope to stay tuned and stay involved. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.